Hello, and welcome to Doing Things Differently, a podcast where I'm looking into what people are doing outside the normal way of doing things in order to try new things, develop new strategies, and approach problems with a different perspective. Today, I'm talking to Tom Augenthaler, who's the owner and founder of the Influencer Marketer. I talked to him recently through LinkedIn, connected with him, and went to see him speak and found his approach to influencing very different. It's not the traditional have somebody send me something and then do a post in a flashy location with it. He really gets down to the science behind it and how to put it into practice, especially when it comes to business marketing. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Phil. I'm really happy to be here.
So kind of how did you get to this point, and how did you come up with the idea of this influence marketing, but not applied to the consumer place, applied to the business space?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of like a journey. Okay, so I like to describe myself sort of tongue in cheek as a recovering PR person. Okay, so I spent many years in the public relations field and with a number of global agencies. And I really sort of cut my teeth there, so to speak. And after working for a number of them, I had moved to Houston. And after a while, we started, one of the clients that one of the agencies got was HP, the tech company. And HP has a large presence here in the Houston area. So I started working on that account, got to know a lot of the people there, and eventually I ended up getting hired on at HP. And at the time, I was handling there were a number of divisions inside the company because the company was a behemoth at that point. It had not split up into multiple entities yet. And so there were multiple divisions. The division that I was housed in was called the Personal Systems Group. And inside that group, all the personal computers, laptops, desktops, any kind of handheld device, any kind of device that was conjoined with any of those computers was usually handled in that division. So from a PR perspective, I was handling consumer laptops for the company. So there were a number of interesting observations and challenges that I had going on there at the time. One of them was, well, it's just the scope of the work itself was pretty big because we had, multiple regions around the world. And of course, there were people inside those regions, and some worked for the company directly, some were with agencies. So it was kind of this hybrid mix of employees for the company and then agencies. But what made it more challenging was the economic situation going on at the time. Right around 2008, if you recall, that's when the banking sector was going through all these problems and the mortgage crisis and real estate, all this stuff. There was a bubble and it was bursting. And the trouble was, from my perspective at the job, was that many of the publications that we dealt with were going out of business. So a lot of those journalists were jumping ship and they were going into different jobs if they could find them, or they were going independent. And it was really sort of a tumultuous time. So from a job perspective, that the challenge was then, well, how do I get the word out about the products if I can't do it in the traditional method through publications and reviewers that I worked with before? How am I going to get the word out to the end consumer about the next laptop coming out, or the next iteration, or the next whatever it was, right? Next handheld device, whatever it was. How are we going to do that? So we started experimenting with bloggers. At the time, the word influencer was not being used. Nobody used it. And we were just working with bloggers because blogging was getting a lot of coverage in the press at that point. A lot of people were jumping into it. People like Robert Scoble were making names for themselves as bloggers internally at companies like Microsoft. So that's how Robert got his start. It was blogging for or at Microsoft. And then he went off on his own, of course. But it was that kind of movement at the time that we started to look at. So at first it was just really nascent. I mean, it was just, a handful of bloggers that we identified that looked like a good fit, and we contacted them, and then we started arranging for them to get product to review. So I would actually ship laptops to them. They would review them and check them out and take them into different places and, different situations, and then write about it, blog about it. So as the results started coming back in, I noticed that the content was a lot different than the content that you'd see a publication develop, right, or produce. And that was really interesting because one person in particular published a series of blog posts about a laptop, and we calculated it equated to about a 20-page paper. Thinking about writing a 20-page paper in college, this person did the equivalent of that of blog posts over a series of posts. And looking at that and then looking at the response that the posts got was interesting and enlightening. So we continued to experiment with this. Campaigns got a little more sophisticated, and then we started doing contests and things like that, and that really amped it up. Boom, it went up to another level where the CEO of the company took notice of one of the programs that we had run. And the program that I'm talking about was about a product, or was focused on a product that was pretty new and different, but the company had not put the marketing dollars behind it that they might have, right, for whatever reason. And they came to the PR department at one point and said, "Hey, can you guys do anything to spice this up? And let's see if we can drive some more attention to this product." And we developed a blogger program, and it was a 30-day program, and a different blogger every day was going to give away this unit that we had seeded them and whatever. So it ended up being very, very successful, and it drove lots of sales. I was never told how many sales in terms of dollars or the number of units, because the company would not release that even to an employee. But they did tell us it was millions of dollars worth of product. Okay, so that's substantial, right? That's substantial. And if the CEO of the company took note of it, that was also interesting. But what was additionally really fascinating to me was the response by the consumers. So the consumers jumped on board, and they were really congratulatory to HP for being enlightened enough to do something like this. And they were saying things like, HP is a company that gets it. This is the way tech companies have to be going forward. And it was that kind of thing. So I was like, wow, this is really great. So around 2009, I left HP because just a better offer came up, and I worked with this. I jumped on board this small consultancy that focused on doing influencer marketing. Again, we were not calling it influencer marketing. We were calling it word of mouth marketing, things like that, blogger relations, whatever. I mean, we were trying to flap around and figure out how do you term this thing, right? So it was kind of word of mouth. But once I joined that consultancy, it was funny because HP came knocking on the door saying that they wanted us to set up a campaign for them, or a program for them. And this time, though, it was not the division that I had come from, the personal systems group, but it came from the enterprise division. And the enterprise division was nothing but business to business. So it was enterprise networking, enterprise storage, servers, all this kind of stuff. Completely different set of products and services. So I had known people in that division, of course, and so they put me on the account because I knew how HP worked, and I knew how the company thought. So that made a lot of sense. So they just said to me, "All right, you can spearhead this new B2B program for HP." I said, "All right, fine." So I ended up running that from the consultancy side for about 5 or 6 years. And it started off at first with just doing a little event here or there. And then we scaled it. And then we were doing events like, every quarter, a big event every quarter, on top of other programs that we had thought of. and pitch to them. So we really were developing this nice cadre of influencers. Again, we were not calling them influencers, just bloggers, and getting these people together and going to events with them or bringing them to events with HP. And it was really pretty interesting. So around 2017, I left that consultancy and went off on my own. And since then, I've been focusing on smaller clients, mainly B2B SaaS companies that have received venture funding from the B round all the way to being public. But even if they're public, they're much smaller than an HP, right? I mean, HP is an enterprise. So I prefer working with those companies for a number of reasons. One, it's easier to get paid. That's a little selfish on my part. It's also better business for your cash flow, but it also comes down to the teams are very nimble. They're quick to act. I can get on calls with multiple members of the marketing team. So I can get somebody from social media, I can get somebody from content marketing team, the campaigns team, and it's even better if I can get somebody from analyst relations on there so we know what's going on from the analyst relations perspective. And then I can really put together a holistic influencer program, which will be always on, and we can start enrolling these influencers right from the start. And we can find the best influencers for the company based upon what the company goals are, what their marketing initiatives are, and all that kind of stuff. So that's the way I operate now. But that's kind of like a long story to your question, how I arrived here. But I noticed a few things along the way on top of that, and that was how the influencer business was constantly ramping up during this period, right? So I was maybe one of 5 or 6 people in the world doing it at that point, or maybe a dozen. Let's say a dozen to be comfortable. Okay, there was probably a dozen people doing it the way we were doing it. There were no tools at that point. There was nothing. I mean, the only way to find influencers was to go out and do it manually. And boy, it was a manual process. I mean, do you remember when websites used to have blog rolls?
Yeah.
Remember that on a sidebar, a blog, like other blogs or sites we follow?
Yeah.
That's how I found most of these people. It's like you go to a site, it'd be a good one, and you'd be like, okay, the blog roll, man, let's go through every one of these people, and you check everyone out. That's how we found people in those days. Nowadays, of course, there are different tools and things to use, and social media has exploded and has become much more sophisticated. So it's a lot easier these days. But back then it was very nascent and it was just starting out. But anyway, I noticed something from the beginning, which was the way consumer companies were using influencers was different than the way B2B companies were using them. So from a B2B company standpoint, one of the key factors is how do you differentiate your brand and your product set from the competition? And one of the best ways to do that is to inform and educate your buyers. So the buyers in those, at least in those days, there really wasn't a lot. I mean, you could flap around and look at different things, but now we've got G2, the website G2's out there. You can go and look at, I can look at Phil Black's company. I can say, all right, Phil's company's here, and then look at these 5 competitors, right? These are the top 5 competitors according to G2. That's a big help right there, right? I mean, you can just tell so much from that. But in those days, that didn't exist. So we were really manually putting things together. But from the B2B perspective, it is really dependent upon finding influencers who have the expertise and the chops, the street chops, to be able to talk about what they talk about. You can't fake, let me put it to you this way, you can't fake how do you fake being an enterprise storage influencer unless you've lived it, right? Or enterprise networking, or pick a topic, right? I mean, it could be anything. I mean, like that. But you can go to LinkedIn now, and you can look at these people's backgrounds and careers, and you could quickly figure out, does this person really know? Do they have the chops to be able to talk about this? Do they have the expertise set, right? Do they have the authority to be able to talk about this in a way that's going to resonate with buyers. And you can quickly figure that out now, thankfully to LinkedIn. But that's what I noticed. And on the consumer side, it's all about, if you notice, it's all about who's a micro influencer or a nano influencer, a MAGA influencer, a mega influencer, a celebrity or whatever. It's all about social following size. On the B2B side, it's all about expertise.
Okay.
And authority. Okay. So you want to make sure that the influencers you're working with are speaking to your buying set, to your buyers, and in a way that informs and educates them. So are the buyers going to these influencers and listening to their podcasts? Are they reading their blogs? Are they, what are they consuming the content that these people are putting out on LinkedIn, right? Or whatever platform it is that they're using. So that's the stuff that's really important. Now, how does that impact the B2B SaaS company that's working with them? Okay, well, the way that it really, well, there's two ways. One, demand, it drives demand, okay, because B2B buyers today, because of the pandemic, were thrust into a situation. We were all thrust into this bad situation. And the situation was, we can't do business the way we used to. Why? Because there's all these lockdowns, right? We couldn't go to events. There were no events, right? We couldn't go on road shows. We couldn't do all these face-to-face things that we used to do. And suddenly the buyers couldn't rely on those events to learn about all these different product sets anymore. So they started going online themselves and just getting the information, doing the research and educating themselves. So by the time they came to boiled it down to maybe 3 or 4 different companies that they were interested in working with, they already were 70% of the way there. Right? They contact the company and say, "Hey, look, I'm interested in your product. I want to get a demo. Let's get on a call and let's walk me through a few things." Right? So they're already 70% of the way sold. Right? So the table got flipped because of COVID and the pandemic. So now all these buyers are used to doing things that way. They're not going to go back to relying on all these events and road shows and all that kind of jazz. I mean, those will still be there, but it's no longer the primary way of doing things anymore. It's much more digital and virtual. Okay. So this creates challenges and opportunities. So the challenges are, all right, well, how do we do this? How do we get in front of our buyers now so that they can find us, get informed, get educated, and the way to do that is to put out high quality content that helps them in all the places where they're going to look for it. All right, so where do they look for it? They're looking for blog posts, they're looking at articles, right? They're still looking at trade publications too. Those are still very important. Industry analysts are still important, Gartner, Forrester, IDC, all those, they're all still important. But now there's a host of independent analysts as well, and they act as influencers as well. So you can go and work with those people to create content much cheaper than asking Gartner to write something for you or to publish something via Gartner, right? I mean, that's going to cost, I don't know what do they charge these days? So it's always been absurd, but now it's probably even more absurd, right? So you can go to these people and work with them and get high quality content developed that informs and educates. And that is all operating now in what we call, kind of collectively called a dark funnel. So this dark funnel is where everybody's getting their information, but marketing attribution software can't necessarily track it at all in these places. And it also includes like Slack groups or private Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, organic social media. Doesn't get tracked by marketing attribution software. So all these places have become much more important. So LinkedIn, from a B2B perspective, is a very important place. And the organic content that you're placing there, the social media content you're placing there is pretty key. So that's why you don't want to put throwaway content on LinkedIn anymore, right? Your LinkedIn company page should be informing and educating and helping your buyers instead of just saying, oh, we got new job openings, or, hey, we got a new press release and a new product came out this week and it's really great and here's why you should care about it. Well, let's talk about the challenges instead that the buyers are having, and then you can insert some language about your product and how it might help, right? So it's a lot different, and people are starting to figure this out pretty quickly. But these influencers that I work with and help clients get introduced to are a key part of that dark funnel. And they're already getting listened to, and they're already being sought out for their advice, right? So it's a way to sort of short circuit the whole thing and jumpstart it, if you want to think of it that way.
Okay.
Get inserted into that dark funnel a lot more quickly. Here's another thing too. If you go to your search engine, I mean, I use a variety of them, right? I actually have to seesaw back and forth between Google and DuckDuckGo.
Yeah, those are my two as well.
Right, DuckDuckGo, I don't want all these ads. I don't want stuff. I just want to find some information. I go to DuckDuckGo, and I don't want to be tracked, and I don't want all that garbage being thrown at me later on. Otherwise, but I will use Google too, right? At times. And one of the things to use Google for is to see what they're doing and how they're listing content that you're searching for, right? So okay. Video comes up really high in organic search these days. I mean, I introduced a client of mine to an influencer who did a video interview with the CMO, and I just Googled her name. That was one of the top videos that came up. And even though it was done like 6 months ago, that video comes up in the top of organic search under her name. So if anybody's looking to learn about the company, they likely are plugging in names of executives at the company, the CEO, the COO, CMO for sure. They want to know a bit more about the company before they're going to sign on and do a big deal. What are the executives like? What are they saying? How do they sound, right? Because through video, we can, as human beings, we can glean a lot of information through video because it's these subtle cues, right? It's how they speak, how the inflection in the voice, what do they look like? I mean, all these things play because we're visual creatures largely, and we make decisions based on what we see and hear, and video gives us that, which we can't get through the written word. So, yeah. Right. So these are things that are going on now and are really important for any B2B company to be looking at and considering. So I like video as well, especially conversations, because every company puts out their slick marketing videos with someone, and I've been in the recording sessions from some of these, and they do multiple takes and multiple angles, and I mean, the way they splice it together, they can really change and make the presentation a lot stronger. So I do prefer more conversational interviews because I feel like I get more of an insight into their personality, their I guess confidence in their product in a more raw, unfiltered way versus just, like I say, a very nice produced video for a web page. So yeah, a great point. The conversation is a key point. Earlier I had mentioned, I just want to follow up on a point that I started to make and I didn't finish it, and that was there are two things that you get out of working with B2B influencers, right? The demand gen, right? You can drive demand to your brand, to your company. And you can also drive leads. The leads are typically done in different formats. Like podcasts are they're not lead gen. They're not really designed for lead gen. So like this podcast we're having right now, it's just a conversation, but it's a way for people to learn about what's going on in a segment of the universe that maybe they're not that attuned to. Or, they just want another perspective on what's going on here, right? I mean, we all pick up little nuggets of information. It's rare as the podcast episode where you go, oh my gosh, I've learned so much. And I just, right? It's usually a few nuggets you get out of it. And you're like, wow, that was a different way to look at it. Or that was, a new tool to look at that I learned about there, or something like that, right? So it's little nuggets, it's little breadcrumbs, right? But the lead gen stuff, the lead gen activity is much more geared around webinars and things like that.
Oh,
So
okay.
you have to have a different type of format for that. And then webinars, I keep asking people, I'd be interested in what you think. Webinars are, sometimes I think people are getting burned out on webinars, because we all know it's coming with a webinar, right? With a webinar, it's always a sales pitch at some point during the webinar. So there's usually there's a nice intro and they get you all jazzed and excited. And I'm usually at the point now where it's like, please just skip that, get to the meat. I don't need all the jazzed up, excited stuff. Just get me to what you're going to show me and inform me about, educate me about, and then I can, maybe I'll stay on for the sales pitch or not, depending upon how much I've learned. So I'm wondering, do you think people are getting a little jaded with webinars? Because they've become sort of formulaic, I've found over time.
Yes, I completely agree. They are becoming formulaic, and that way they're becoming less viewed because you know what to expect. So I think, to me, the next challenge is, instead of, they do it very segmented. They have you jazzed up, then they have the message, then they go for the sales pitch. Companies have to start doing webinars in a different way. It doesn't need to be, you need to weave the enthusiasm throughout. So it's not, and take the time. And I'm actually happy with it being slightly less produced if it's more authentic. Not with the webinar, you do need a higher level of presentation than, say, a podcast or something like that. But I think there needs to be the ability to show some authenticity and authentic enthusiasm for what you're doing. Don't just get me jazzed up and then let me down. If you're going to get me jazzed up, keep me excited about it throughout the webinar. The problem is, there are people who are good at getting you excited, and then there's the people who are good at informing. And we've got to do a better job of the people informing getting a more interactive, engaging approach. I mean, that's why I'm doing the speaking class, because I'm the one who gets up and gives the informative, fairly low presentation, and I'm trying to figure out how do I keep the audience engaged throughout that while delivering the information. So delivering it in more storytelling, versus just a case study, or how can I weave a story, or how can I weave a story around the points that I'm trying to make? So I think that's a big challenge for webinars, because you're right, I think they're losing their impact,
Yeah, I think, especially with the pandemic, because a lot of companies and whatever shifted to doing webinars suddenly because they couldn't, they couldn't get out on the road anymore, weren't going to have events or whatever. So everybody scrambled to have a virtual event, number one. Then number two, like, fill the gaps of webinars, which is fine. I mean, I understand that, but yeah, you're right. I think we might have to get more creative with how we do the webinars. And then if they're too slick, like you said, then it starts getting a little,
Then it starts feeling like a white paper or
yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know what that balance is, but they have to be the right level, I guess, has to be found. And then I think, we talked about LinkedIn, but I think the ability to take short pieces out, they might publish a webinar in the publishing process. They'll publish the webinar, say, to a page, a recording, but give me some clips in there of some key moments, or let me bookmark, and so if I want to get jazzed up, I can. But if I really just want to go in there to learn about a specific piece, give me the ability as a consumer to highlight the specific messages so I can go right there if I want. So give the users the flexibility in consuming that.
Okay, yeah. I think you're onto something there. It's a tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that's where companies can leverage influencers too, is on these webinars, right? Because company people, when they speak, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to be pretty dry. And your kind of eyes glaze over and it's like, okay, here we go. I mean, I was watching I don't want to say the company, but I was watching a little bit of a clip the other day of a keynote. Guy comes out, CEO, whatever, starts talking, and I'm like, already I can tell. I mean, the energy's just going right out of the room, right? Just whoop. I mean, there was an exec at HP. I won't say who it was, but this is the most boring dude you can ever imagine. I mean, just when he got up, he sucked all the air out of the room, and you could see everybody's eyes just glaze over. They just glaze over. It's just like, everybody goes into their own space world, and they're all like, I don't know what they're doing. They're daydreaming about whatever it is they're daydreaming. They're not listening to him. So the influencers, though, a lot of them are very practiced at telling good stories, because that's what they do all the time through their blog posts and their videos and podcasts and whatnot. So they get very practiced at that. So influencers, you can leverage influencers. That's another way to leverage them, is to enroll them into getting help on your webinars or your virtual events. I've helped a lot of clients do
that. I'm interested, right now LinkedIn is a big business to business, but what do you see in terms of the Instagram and TikTok potential that is, I would say, the next generation probably will look, they're already looking for consumer as they start entering the workforce and becoming decision makers. How do you think TikTok and Instagram or Snapchat, whatever one it is?
I think there's huge potential there, and I think it for a few different reasons. One, the demographics of the different age groups and how they approach social media is different. So where I'm a little older, TikTok doesn't appeal to me, right? Yeah. Personally, it doesn't appeal to me. I like Instagram. I like it a lot because Facebook to me has gotten sort of cumbersome. It's like, oh, I don't know. It's too much there. And it's just, I don't know. It seems like it's too much to wade through, For Instagram, it's like very focused. It's image-based or video-based. Boom, 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 boom. I know the accounts I like. I can bounce around, look at them. I think there's a lot of potential for business to business on Instagram and TikTok. TikTok, I'm noticing that some B2B brands are experimenting with reaching out to a younger audience and sort of educating them about a variety of topics. It could be finance, it could be manufacturing, it could be anything. If you just tell it in a quick, interesting, entertaining story, these younger people are quick to latch onto that. So that tells me, as these younger people rise up through the ranks of these companies, whether it's an enterprise or a smaller company, they're going to look to these platforms for information and get educated. All right, they're going to look for influential people there to follow. So to me, I advise influencers to be looking and using those platforms, and some of them are doing really quite well with it. I mean, there's a supply chain influencer. Think about supply chain. Okay, supply chain before the pandemic, supply chain was like, what? Supply chain. Yeah, I know there's a supply chain, but do I really need to know much about it? As long as I can get the ketchup at the store and the diapers and I get my dry cleaning, whatever, it doesn't affect me much, right? Unless there's a problem.
But we never had a disruption like this before. I mean, you'd have little tiny blips, but we never had disruption. It was just a blip, Right.
So now people are interested in like, how does the supply chain work? What are the elements of the supply chain? So you got rail, you've got road, you've got freight, overseas freight, you've got airline freight. All right, the costs are all different, right? I mean, all the issues to bring things around and move them around are all different, right? Now we're all paying attention to things like Amazon distribution centers and like where they're being located, right? I mean, I was noticing here in Houston, they're building some of those, and they have in the Civic Center nearby, they're holding classes for their new employees there, right? And they're recruiting, and they're doing a lot of educating of new recruits about of new employees about what they're doing with these distribution centers and how they're operating and what the protocols are. I never even thought about that stuff before, right? But now we do. So I know some supply chain influencers who are doing really well. One of them is pretty prominent on Instagram. Her name is Sherry Heinisch. She's with IBM right now, but she was independent before that. But she still talks a lot about supply chain issues, right? And one of the places she does that is on Instagram, believe it or not. Sherry's done a wonderful job. And she's actually one of the people that I point to if people are thinking about becoming a B2B influencer, right? If they want to be, it's legal or supply chain or procurement or some kind of high tech stuff, whatever it happens to be, Sherry is a great influencer to look at and model yourself after. So why would you want to model yourself after Sherry? Okay, well, Sherry has consistent branding and she brands herself across these different platforms the same way. Okay. So she calls herself, she terms herself, she's got a little moniker, the supply chain queen. So, okay, supply chain. She's got the name supply chain, the word supply chain is in the brand. Supply chain queen designates that she's a female, right? Normally with a lot of things, not to be biased, but I think that most people would think supply chain, there's probably a lot of guys in the business, right? A lot of guys. So it's different. It's different having a woman in there, right? Okay, well, she's probably got a different perspective on supply chain then, and she does. So it's interesting, right? The way that she talks about it is different. The things that she highlights are different. And so I think that if you looking to model yourself on becoming a B2B influencer, Sherry is a great one to do that with. So you can look at her content, you can say, okay, yeah, I can produce that kind of content, and it's just about building a plan and putting it together and executing it. Now, if you're a company, you can look to these places like Instagram and TikTok now, and you'll find people like Sherry. I don't know if Sherry's on TikTok yet, but I know she's on Instagram for sure. And she's pretty big influence on LinkedIn as well. So LinkedIn is probably the epicenter for B2B influencers, right? In social media. It's like LinkedIn is, every business has got a LinkedIn page probably, and all of the employees are on there, right? So it's like a natural. And LinkedIn is the place for people to talk about business topics. So that's the epicenter. But then you radiate out from there. It's like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Slack, other places where all these conversations are happening. So think of it from that perspective. But the younger people are looking at these platforms now. They're very used to them, very comfortable with them. And they're going to be looking as they move forward in their careers, they're going to be looking at how to, they're going to be looking at those platforms for that kind of content. Whether you and I are ready to do it or not is almost irrelevant. They're going to be, they're going to be looking for it, So I would position my company to be there.
That's interesting because what I think is interesting is, especially for large companies who almost are with ecosystems within themselves, I wonder what the possibility would be to actually use an influencer campaign within your company. I mean, all the big companies have SharePoint, they have the Microsoft Stream, and you get a lot of content. I wonder what the process would be to identify influence within your organization, especially when you're undergoing periods of change. I mean, in the oil and gas industry, we're having a huge shift, in terms of the engineering companies have done the similar things, they know how to design all these facilities. Now we're looking at designing a whole new type of facilities, and so it's becoming a challenge. How do we get people within the company excited about using technology in a different way? So I just thought of that right now. That's interesting how companies could even use it to help organically get people enthusiastic about the change that an entire industry is undergoing.
Yeah, every industry operates differently. Every industry has its own sort of protocols, right, that are acceptable. What social media is doing is sort of breaking down some of that stuff. So I come out of the tech industry, doing PR for tech companies. So tech companies are always the fastest and the first to adopt this stuff. So, when I hark back to a guy like Robert Scoble earlier in our conversation, Robert got to start at Microsoft. What Microsoft did was they saw the potential for blogging. So what they did was they set up a platform and then gave permission to
Yeah.
the employees to go ahead and blog. Now, all right, there are certain things you can't talk about, right? You can't talk about finances. You can't talk about earnings. You can't talk about future. You can't talk about any of that.
Yeah.
But you can talk about the products, and you can talk about what they're trying to do with the products, and you can talk about who they're trying to serve and what some of the challenges are and the ways that they've gotten, they've overcome those challenges. There's plenty of things to talk about there. And that's what Robert did. And he just started talking and blogging, and he built the following and then took the following with him once he left Microsoft, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, early on, I remember Robert told me at an event, a private event, we were there. It was an HP event. Put it in context. HP had this little high-tech house that they had built on one of their campuses. I think it was in the Cupertino campus when they still had that one. They had a little house, and it was a high-tech house. And the house was totally equipped with like all the state-of-the-art stuff. You could go in, Phil, before everybody could do this, you could go in with your handheld and you could like adjust the blinds and the windows and the lighting and all this stuff. Right now, you can kind of do that all, but at the time, it was really a new and different thing. So they would take customers in there and showcase this technology, which is all powered by HP and HP partners. And I remember we had an event there for some influencers, and Robert was one of them. And I was just chatting with Robert, and he was telling me about how he had been given an Amazon Kindle, one of the first Amazon Kindles. And he was asked, just look at it and blog about it if you like it, whatever. Amazon gave him permission to do that. So he did. And because of that, all these people jumped on and started buying the Amazon Kindle like crazy because Robert had talked about it and talked about the power of it. And I thought that was really fascinating. And then he was like, yeah, he's like, I'm going to leave Microsoft and I'm going to go do some other things. I was like, okay, cool. So I stay in touch with Robert today. He does a lot of different things now, but, and he's had his ups and downs, but he's been pretty consistent with what he likes and how he does it. So that's just a glimpse of what's possible. So if a company like Microsoft could do it, I mean, company could do it. So you got to give permission to your employees, and then you got to give them guardrails, right? You got to give them guardrails about what can you talk about, what can you not talk about, right? And then just let them do it, right? And encourage them to do it. So if you tell them we need you all to start blogging, they're not going to do it unless you start saying it's in the job description, right? It's like, okay, we need 3 blog posts a week or whatever. And it's like, here's the deal with that though. Some people are good writers and just naturally like to write. Other people don't. Some people are really they like to talk, right? Like we're doing now. Maybe give them permission to set up a podcast, right? Or be guests on podcasts with other companies if your own company isn't comfortable doing that. But give them a little PR training. Being a recovering PR person, I always like to review the messaging with them and that's the position of the company. This is what we do, what we don't do, how we talk about things, how we don't talk about things, right? And make sure that you're putting a good foot forward for the company, right? And then have at it. So a lot of it is just, Phil, it's just giving them permission to do it, encouraging them to do it, and giving them the tools, right? And you'll find that you'll probably have a bunch of people that will want to do it. Because honestly, the best evangelists inside of any company are the people who work there. They're not outside influencers, right? Mm-hmm. It's the people inside the company that know the most. They talk to the customers, right? They talk to partners, so they're fully equipped to be able to discuss these things in a meaningful manner, informational, educational, whatever. So I think that it's a great idea. I think more companies should do it. I think the companies that really lead and win in the future are going to be those that do just that. And companies that are, rather industries that are holding back, like the insurance industry is one that just, all the insurance industry thinks about is risk.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what they're paid to do, right? It's about risk. What's the risk of you dying? What's the risk of you getting a car accident? What's the risk of you the house burning down, whatever. So they're hyper they're so hyper about risk, they don't want anybody to go out and evangelize anything or talk about anything. And that's why there's a lockdown on all social media with most of these people, except the people that are selling. It's okay to go out and sell.
Yeah, the agents are the approved.
Yeah, they can go out and sell, but that doesn't tell me anything about why your product is better than another. I just know I'm going to get sold, So I'd be more interested in knowing what the challenges are about the insurance industry is undergoing these days. Because we hear about it from the oil and gas guys and gals. We hear it from those people. There's lots of challenges like you were just highlighting, right? Things are constantly shifting. A new administration comes into office, things change, right? A world event happens, things change, right? Energy is the lifeblood of every country on earth. So the energy industry is like primal to what's going on. So knowing about what's happening there is pretty key. So, but I think these other industries have got to wake up, and they've got to figure out, we can't have everybody locked down all the time. We got to be willing to talk about some things, But again, give them the tools, give them permission, and give them the guardrails, and then you're all right.
Yeah. How do you figure out the impact of, say you're doing something like this? How do you measure the impact, especially if you're talking about these dark funnels? Are you looking for literally like trends over months, or are you looking?
Yeah, it's going to take a little longer.
Pages or.
Yeah, it's not like turn on a dime. It's not like, okay, we're going to hold a webinar tomorrow, and we're going to, have 500 people on the webinar, and we know that, 200 of them are going to drop off halfway through, and we know, statistically, you can kind of figure out what the odds are in a webinar of, if you got 100 people on the webinar, how many of them are going to drop off, how many are going to stick through, how many sales are probably going to like, okay, you can kind of statistically figure that out now because so many have been done. There's industry standards pretty much. So if you're doing lead gen, again, you're going to do activities like that. Now, what I was talking about earlier is demand gen. Demand gen stuff is definitely different. So what you're doing is you're putting out information and education into that dark funnel or those private networks. As one of the influencers I correspond with, his name is Tim. He's a CIO influencer, and he calls them private networks because he's got his own private Slack groups. He's got, he's part of roundtables that are not public, and they're CIOs only, right? So that's the way to think of it. You've got to put the content out there, and it's going to take a while for it to come back to you. So it's not like hit the tennis ball against the wall and immediately comes back. You're going to hit it out into that dark void, and after a while, you're going to just keep hitting those balls out there, and then they're going to start coming back, right? They're going to start coming back when you least expect it, and they're going to come back because of that content that you're putting out there. You're helping your buyers. You got to help them, right? You've got to understand what their challenges are. If you understand what their challenges are, you can understand what kind of content then to put out there to help them. And it's a process. So I would say it takes months. I know that marketers are not going to like to always hear that, but it does. It takes a while. We're also in a period of transition. We've got to remember that too. Just because the pandemic is largely ending. Let's put it. Maybe we're at the beginning of the end of the whole thing. What was it? Churchill's quote? It was like, we're not at the beginning, we're not at the end, we're at the beginning of the ending of the beginning, something like that. It was some clever quote of his, but it was like, we're at the beginning of the end or something like that. So, but things are now people are running events again, but they're still waffling about, do we have a virtual component to it? Do we not? Do we go, how much do we go full bore back into being a full, a full physical event, or is it half and half? What are we doing here? But at the meantime, everybody has now been conditioned to find all their information, do their own research online. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to change. People are not going to go back to, oh, well, now I don't have to do all that work on my own. People like to be able to do those things on their own. They like to have their own processes and their own access to information. They like to be able to get it and digest it as they want. And that's not going to change. So the shift has happened. It's whether companies are going to continue to follow through on it or not. And they should. So their own content marketing should be different. Their social media marketing should be different. They should be working with influencers if they've got some of these campaigns already up and going. They should be working with influencers now. I don't always advocate putting influencers before your content marketing or social media marketing. You can do it that way. Brands have done it that way, but you've got to be really consistent with it, and you've got to be willing to put a lot of marketing dollars behind it to make it work. And you've got to give it enough time to resonate, right? So remember, there's a lot of competition out there, and just because you put out a blog post or two, or you're on a couple of podcasts now, doesn't mean that an avalanche of leads are going to come in. You've got to continually put it out there. You've got to sort of change the zeitgeist. You've got to influence that zeitgeist. And the way to do it is by putting out that high quality content in those different forms. And then also educating your employees too. That's the other thing. So if you're going to allow your employees to become influencers on their own, right? Company influencers, you've got to be able to inform them about what's happening with your other marketing. So they need to know if a new blog posts up. I mean, I remember being at HP, it's like, somebody has a blog, I never heard of it. It's like, I remember one time I got called into this crisis because there was a message board, and the message board had, I don't know, some guy had been trolling the message board and trying to gin up some interest in something negative about the company. So I don't remember what the topic was, but I just remember being dragged into this scenario, and I was like, there's a message board for this? You're kidding me. It's like, no, it's been up for several years now. I'm like, several years? I'm like, well, what's going on with it? Well, somebody had left the job, and then nobody had been monitoring this message board since. So the message board had kind of gone off on its own, and these problems had cropped up with these users on there. So we had to figure out a way to sort of short circuit that and get it back on track. And it was just this sort of really educational process. What's going on there? But again, I was like, you're kidding me. There's a message board about this? I mean, really weird. And then I had somebody send me the link, and I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, this is a pretty robust board. It's been up for a long time. A lot of going on there. So you've got to make sure that you start initiatives, you're going to see them through. That's my point here. Don't have message boards and other initiatives that just, you get bored with them after 6 months and you don't do anything with them anymore. Well, you're not going to get anything out of it, right? You've got to nurture these programs. So think carefully about what you really want to put your time, effort, and money behind before you invest in it, right? So it's like buying stocks. I mean, I don't know anybody, well, I guess there are a lot of people that gamble on stocks and just buy them because they think they're going to go up or something. But really, the way to look at it is like, is this a company I want to invest in, right? For any period of time. And why do I want to invest in it, right? Is it to round out my portfolio, whatever, and your marketing is like a portfolio, right? You've got different assets there, right? And it's a matter of putting money behind the different assets to grow them. And influencers are one of those assets, So again, I mean, most companies have probably got a campaign team or a campaign person. They've got a social media person. They've got a content marketing person. They've got some person doing lead gen, some doing demand gen, right? You got to get them all talking together. They can't be siloed. They've got to be talking together, and they've got to be saying, well, this is what we're doing on the demand side. What are you guys doing on the lead gen side? You're doing any webinars this quarter? Okay, what are they? Who are you working with? Okay, you're working with that influencer on a webinar. Can we do something with them and invite them onto a podcast that we've got going, right? As a guest, or whatever. So once you get the conversations going, Phil, it's amazing what kind of ideas crop up at that point, right? And opportunities, because it's like, oh, wow, yeah, we could do this, we could do that. And then once you get the content developed by the influencer, let's say the influencer develops the blog post or does the article or does the podcast or whatever, what are you going to do with it for your own marketing? How are you going to repurpose that content? Because you had mentioned earlier, slicing up longer form pieces of content into smaller pieces for use on social media and things. And I'll just throw this out there as a tool to look at. It's called lately.ai.
Okay.
Lately is a great tool for this. I've talked with the CEO over there. I don't get anything out of this, by the way. I don't have a relationship other than just liking their company and liking their product. But what they've got an artificial intelligence aspect to it. So if you load up a video there, the artificial intelligence will go through it, analyze it, and pick out the pieces that it thinks are the most interesting.
Oh, okay.
And you can use those, and it pulls out the clips for you.
Oh.
So you could just plug them into your social media. So think of that as teasers for the long.
Yeah.
Right? What companies don't do, man, I'm going to tell you, 90% of them do the same thing. They do it wrong. They're like, well, we tweeted about that blog post. I'm like, yeah, but how many times did you tweet about it? Oh, once or twice. I'm like, once or twice? Twitter's ephemeral. It's like, we're all looking at, we go like this with Twitter, right?
Yeah.
We go like, yeah. Oh, that looks interesting. Scrolling. Okay, yeah, that looks interesting. But we never go back that far.
Yeah.
You know, we might go back a few hours, but we don't go back like 3 days. Nobody does that unless you're some journalist looking up dirt on somebody, right? but so you've got to on something like Twitter, you've got to consistently put out little tweets, and then you can go back and erase them later on, right? But you're going to put out a schedule of tweets over the course of a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to like really drive some interest to the podcast episode. And like the same with LinkedIn, you've got to put it up there more than once.
Yeah.
Right. Let's do it 3 or 4 times over the course of a couple of weeks. And then you can always go back and delete the old ones, right? To clean up your feed, the company feed, no problem there. But they don't think that way. They're like, oh, done. Yep. We tweeted about it. You tweeted about it. Great. I mean, maybe 25 people saw it. You know, you've got to continually put it up there. You know, people are moving around social media all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you're on your lunch break, checking your emails. You're looking at some of your social media accounts. You know, somebody's messaged you, somebody's texted you. You're looking at all this stuff. You're bouncing around all the time. You got to keep that in mind. People are not like looking at their Twitter feed just going, I'm looking for tweets about, you know, this company. No, they're not. You know, they're just scrolling around. They're like, what's of interest? Boom, 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 boom. Our minds are like jumping all over the trees, you know, from one tree to another. So you've got to put the content up there to get found, right?
How do you, as an influencer, how do you measure the impact you're having? I want to flip it around real quick. The last question. How do you measure as an influencer the impact that you're having so you know the value you're bringing?
Yeah, so I look at it a couple of different ways. So the first is the content I'm putting up there seemingly resonating, right? And my primary platform is LinkedIn for social media. It's LinkedIn. And then I do some work on Twitter too, but my Twitter work isn't nearly I don't pay as much attention to it as I do on LinkedIn. I just like LinkedIn as a platform. It gels with me and the way I like to work. I like the conversations that get generated there. So I'll look to see, as long as your post is live, you can see how many views it's getting, right? So I look at the views. Yeah, okay, those are just views, but I look at them. And then I look at how many likes or comments I've gotten. Now, really, what's more important is the comments. You know, and then the reshares and things like that. But things on LinkedIn that get reshared usually don't do well. LinkedIn's not a platform that really rewards sharing content, where Twitter rewards shared content. So really on Twitter, you're looking at how many times did this get shared? How many comments did I get? Did I elicit a conversation there? Did it get me into a conversation there? Those are the types of things I'm looking for in the social media. I'm also looking for leads. Over time, am I getting inquiries from companies about wanting help with something? You know, I'll get, you know, do you show people how to do this? I'll get questions like that. What if we're an internal team and want to keep it all internal? Yeah, well, I've got a training program for that, you know, so yes, I know how to do that and I do that. And it's all tailored to to the particular company getting trained. So that's what I do. But I get other questions. Well, how do you find the influencers? How do you do this? How do you do that? So I'll give some free advice, usually through the messaging, and I'll say, well, hey, if you need any other help, let me know. So it's like the quality of the queries is something I look at. My website is there more. I don't get a lot of conversation on the blog posts. Most companies don't anymore. All that social media sort of grabbed all that activity a long time ago. Some blogs do. Some blogs still get comments and stuff, but things like marketing blogs don't so much anymore. I mean, some do, like I said, but others don't. And so I don't really look for that there, but I look for queries. What kind of queries am I getting? How often am I getting them? Is it the kind of company that I'm after, right? That my target buyer, things like that. Look at that whiteboard, man. Yeah, it looks like we got a lot of things planned there.
Well, I'm kind of embarking on an experiment. So I enjoy speaking, and I've spoken at quite a few places. I'm actually taking a course and trying to develop a non-technical speech. So I know how to do the technical speech. Here's the problem, here's the approach, and then here's the solution. But now I'm trying to create more of a speech that makes the audience feel something, because I know how to do an informative speech, but I want to be able to connect with the audience. I want to be able to present an idea and then have them hopefully change their mindset. Since I'm working in technology, the problem is many times the technology can be developed, but it's the adoption and it's the mindset and it's the ability to see what it can do for the specific person who has to use it, especially in a large company.
So you're talking more, is it a little bit more motivational type talking?
Yeah, it's motivational type speech, which I'm finding very challenging because I want to get up and give my points and, that's it. But now I'm trying to create a story that holds the audience interest and, like I say, gets them enthusiastic about something versus more of a lecture style.
I got a good contact of mine, actually a friend of mine, who he's got a course he just developed and is marketing it now. And he's got years of experience doing media training for people. So he's worked with some of the biggest companies in the world, helping their executives do just that. And he was also, interestingly enough, he was on MSNBC. No, he was on CNBC. Excuse me, CNBC in the earlier days with Joe Kernan and Mark Haynes and all those guys reporting on the markets and everything. So, and he co-hosted with Ron and Sana for a while there. They were co-hosting together. So he's got good chops. If you want, I can be more than happy to connect you with Jeff. His name is Jeff Lachey.
Okay.
And so, I mean, let me know how this goes, the course you're taking now. But Jeff has got a sort of passive course where you do it yourself, but then he's also got elements of it where he directly helps you. Okay. So, and if anybody can do it, believe me, it's Jeff, because I mean, he's worked with so many kinds of people. I mean, pharmaceutical executives and tech execs, everybody. So I'd be more than happy to make the intro for you.
Yes, I would be very interested in talking to him. Like I say, I'm finding it much more challenging than I expected to motivate, to inform and motivate, because I know how to inform, but I want to inform and motivate.
Yeah, well, you're coming at it from a very logical perspective, right? Well, I mean, tech is very logical, right? You've got the problem, here's the solution, here's how we arrived at the solution, and then here's how you apply it. Okay, cool. All right, good. Yeah, all right. But then the motivational aspect is very much what you said at the beginning, it's storytelling. So it's having relatable stories that other people could say, hey, that's happened to me too. I mean, if you think about it, That's how some of the best speakers actually get their point across. It's through telling different stories, and you're like, oh yeah, that's happened to me, or I know people like that, or So yeah, no, it's definite skill. I guess some people have a knack for it, but other people, definitely have to be trained.
Yes, I think I fall into the latter. I'm also taking an improv class to
That'll help you.
yeah, just get up on stage without even knowing, without even knowing, just to be more comfortable on the stage, be more comfortable with the group.
How's the improv going, just if I might ask?
So it's very interesting. I'm still very up and down. So some weeks I feel like it comes naturally, and I feel like the words come out of my head and make sense and are funny sometimes. Other times I just get up and I'm just like, I feel like I need to get pull it out like a word for word, and it comes out and I'm stiff, and I don't know really why that is yet. So I'm trying to figure out why sometimes I'm so much more at ease and other times I'm so stiff. My girlfriend's she's done some stage productions, and she says it's about being completely there on stage and focusing on being there versus my mind seems like it's going in a bunch of different directions, and so maybe I haven't consciously figured it out, but maybe my mind is more at ease some days, and then other days I got all these little, maybe because of work or projects or something, all these little threads kind of floating
more on your mind. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I'm going to try something. I talked to one actor, and they said what they did sometimes as a group before the show was they just literally stood in a circle, and you do exercises in improv to kind of warm up.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the exercises was literally looking every person in the eye contact, and just simply saying, I'm here, I will be on stage present today. And then you just go around and do that to everyone, and the other person responds, I'm here with you, I am on stage with you, just to really try to get everybody focused on, we're here, we don't, no matter what's going on outside, we are here, and our only goal is to be with each other on this stage in this production.
It's interesting because there's an influencer I follow named Tim Ferris. I don't know if you follow him too, but Tim has some tips about public speaking, and some of them are really interesting. One is, know what you're going to wear before you go and speak, so you don't have to think about that.
Yeah.
He talks about rehearsing and all that kind of stuff too, naturally. But he also talks about not eating certain foods before you go and speak. I think he talked about avoiding bread, other carbohydrates like that. And he recommended other foods instead. I think it's because with a lot of carbs, it drops into your system quick, and then you peak, and then you're
yeah.
So, and I actually followed his tips when I went to speak in London a few years back. I was a little nervous about it because I guess I was out of the United States and I was in a different country, different city. And there's just a little something about London because everybody's got an accent there. They all sound smarter than us Americans. So I was like, oh boy, I was like really working on it, and I had a set time limit, so I had to keep my talk to a certain time limit, and then there was a Q&A portion, so I had to really work on that because I like to ramble. And then I really stuck to his diet ideas. He also talked, I remember, about going for a walk during the morning before the talk, so it kind of cleared my head a little bit, and that did work. So it's just kind of interesting tips. Look them up. You can Google them, Tim Ferris tips on public speaking, and you'll find them. So you might think about some of those too. Ones you were just describing sound like they would be pretty key.
Yeah, so I just kind of was talking. So the next improv class is Monday, so I want to try and see if people are up for trying it, and just see if that makes a difference, on being stage. It's interesting too in terms of kind of, this is my third level, so it's kind of, people have kind of dropped out along the way, so now it's kind of the core group of people doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because one of the women in the class she said, as we're learning, she says, I'm feeling more comfortable because I know there are other people on the sidelines. You guys are there, and we're learning how we can help each other off the stage. So it's like when you see a scene getting stuck, what your troupe can do to help you, tag you out for a second and then come in and give the scene more depth, and then step back and or give you sounds from the side to help create the space you're in, to help create the atmosphere and things like that. It's fascinating. I'm really enjoying it.
Good, man. So you're pushing your boundaries.
Yeah.
It's good though. There's different ways to do that, but I think that's good to do. Otherwise you just get boxed in over time, and then you're just not trying new things, not pushing the envelope a little bit. It's good for the brain, good for your mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been a fascinating insight into the mind of a recovering PRaholic. I love that term.
Yeah. It's PR is a great industry. It really is, and it's a very necessary one. And I think PR people get a lot of guff or not a lot of respect all the time. But if there's a crisis, boy, your PR team is going to be the first you're calling on for help.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining me today. For anyone who's interested in talking to Tom directly, his website is theinfluencermarketer.com. Also, you can reach him on his LinkedIn profile, which I'll put links to in the comments of this podcast. Thanks a lot, Tom, for joining. I've enjoyed having you.
Hey, man, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's great.